Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the globe, I hope you had an exceptional Independence Day, or Independence Day, as we like to say around here. It is going to be a summer of independence, and we are continuing our really important, groundbreaking Meet the Independents series. Joining me now from the great state of Idaho, the great and powerful Todd Achilles is here on Independent Americans. Welcome, sir.
How's it going, Paul? Good to be here.
Good to have you, man. We've been in touch over the last couple of weeks. You have now formally announced you are running for the Senate as an independent. I want to dig into that. I want people to know more about you. Thanks for joining us. But first, let me start with a question. Where are you, Todd, and how are you? How was your fourth?
Fourth was great. I'm at home here in Boise, Idaho, and yeah, I'm doing good, man. The response to announcing for this race has just been phenomenal. So I spent all yesterday calling folks that signed up to volunteer, dude, and it just reaffirms your faith in America. Some good people.
Well, I think you're going to reaffirm people's faith in America too, because we've been waiting for candidates like you. I'm going to dig into that, but maybe just start with for folks who are just getting to know you, finding out about you for the first time, Todd. Tell them who you are. Tell us about your background and why you're running for office at all. Why do you want to do this?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a family farm in Oregon. I served a couple of years on active duty as a tank commander and a platoon leader. And then I got into the tech sector when I got out, and just I had a great career, 20 plus years, T-Mobile, Hewlett Packard, a couple startups. But then I had this itch. I wanted to get back into public service. I was tired of doing the private sector thing. I felt like I had more to contribute. Uh, so left my job at Hewlett Packard, and slowly sort of moved my way back into politics and working in policy. A seat came open in my neighborhood in Boise, and I raised my hand. And so I served two sessions in the Idaho legislature as a Democrat. And my district is only 25% Democrat, and I won with 60% of the vote. And it's kind of who I am. I'm really not interested in the party politics or any of that. I mean, we got serious stuff to get done, and all good policy is bipartisan, right? Uh, and I'm running for a bunch of reasons, Paul. I mean, the guy that's in there, he's been in politics almost as long as I've been alive. He's one of the oldest and one of the richest in the state. We're younger than the national average, and we make less money than the national average. Uh, and we can't have people representing the state who had all the benefits of, low income, affordable housing, all that stuff in the 60s and 70s, and they basically just pulled up the ladder behind it. So if you're a millennial or Gen Z in Idaho, and you're struggling, it's just the economy is fundamentally unfair. The system's fundamentally unfair, and we need folks who will get to Washington and work on changing that.
So let's talk about the independent piece because I think you also represent another wave, right? Folks who are leaving the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they're declaring their independence. We had Don Bacon on a couple of months ago. Now, he may run for president as an independent. We've had Brian Bangs was on recently running for Senate in South Dakota, has left the
Good
Democratic
dude.
Party. We had Mike Lawler on last week. I asked him why he hasn't left the Republican Party. But I think there is a new wave coming. And I think we're going to see it in this next year of people who leave the party for a number of reasons and declare your independent, their independence. So let me ask you, why did you declare your independence? Why did you leave the Democratic Party? And how do you define independent in this new landscape?
Yeah, good questions. Well, you know the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome. I
I thought
I,
it was
I
I
get
thought it
that
was
book.
I thought it was running for political office in 2025.
There's some of that, but listen, I mean, the two party system in DC is just fundamentally broken, and we're failing as a nation, right? I mean, it's serious. We can't get our shit together. Our the army is smaller now than it's been since way before I served. Uh, the Navy's struggling. China is kicking our ass, both militarily and economically. Um, and we can't get out of our own way and do these big hard policy problems that or solve these big hard policy problems that we need to. So it's just we need to do something different. And again, I go back to one of the lessons I learned in the army is lead by example, man. If there's going to be a better way for this country, then we're going to become an independent. We're going to leave the broken two-party system behind, and I'm going to lead by example. I'm going to give a path for Idahoans to get behind.
There's no secret now that the Republican Party favorability rating is dropping. More folks are declaring their independence. Veterans, over 50% are independent. The Democratic Party brand is in the toilet and seems to be dropping fast. That's got to be true in Idaho. Can you talk about, how you're going to overcome the fact that you used to be a Democrat? There will be a Republican in this race. There's also a Democrat that's declared, so you will be able to differentiate yourself. But we saw with Dan Osborne, when there wasn't a Democrat, they called him Democrat Dan, which killed him in Nebraska. In Idaho, I got to imagine people are going to be much more open to you as an independent, but you do represent this new generation. So how can they trust you to be independent and know that you're not, secretly a Democrat?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the number one thing I heard when I was knocking on doors in the last campaign is, "Man, Todd, you're a better Republican than that other person on the ballot." And my closest partners in the legislature were Republicans, and again, because all good policy is bipartisan, and we've got a great, strong group of Democrats in the Idaho legislature, and we're all trying to move the state forward in the right way. But the partisanship is brutal. Listen, my Republican friends, I couldn't go up to their desk and have a conversation with them on the floor because somebody would film it and then that would be used against them. So I had to always talk with them outside of the chamber, which is just ridiculous. And then, some of the worst things that folks have said about me when I was in session came from the far left. The job in front of us is in the middle, right? And the parties just retreat, particularly in Idaho. The parties are just retreating farther and farther into the corners, and the majority of Idahoans are kind of left in the middle.
Can you talk about that a bit more? Because there's the national context and there's obviously the local context, right? Like folks from Idaho, have a spirit of independence that I think is unique, right? But you've also got the national environment where Trump keeps going to the right and driving the Republican Party further right. And now you've got, the rise of Mamdani here in New York. You've got AOC, you've got Bernie Sanders. Can you talk about how you think Idahoans are reacting to that? And do you see other folks from the state legislature or across Idaho or maybe across the country that you think are close to a breaking point and might feel like they can finally do it now because they see you do it?
Yeah, well, listen, there's four different versions of the Republican Party in the state of Idaho. There's two different freedom caucuses. There's kind of this old school libertarian, and then there's this more moderate, which I think is a tradition in Idaho, which is invest in schools, invest in roads, invest in infrastructure. Let's be smart about what we're doing, but fiscally responsible. And then you've got the Dems, and so there is no Republican, right? Depending on who you are and who you talk to, and I think that's the reality. And Idaho you're right. We are fiercely independent. Back before we closed the primaries in 2011, so in 2012, 70% of Idahoans were unaffiliated with the party. 70%. That was the highest in the nation. And because of closed primaries, we forced people to pick parties and force them into those corners. But that value set, that ethos of being independent, it's still there. And I'm seeing that just with people responding to my campaign.
So you do support open primaries, something that's going to be critical here. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you support it?
Yeah, we actually started up a veterans organization, Veterans for Idaho Voters. Idaho's got 160,000 vets. It's the sixth highest in the U.S. on a per capita basis. And we just, again, because vets are by and large nonpartisan. So we built this big veterans organization. It's one of the largest in the state in support of open primaries. Broad support for open primaries. Independents should be able to participate. They shouldn't have to pay for an election they can't participate in. And then, we just didn't communicate well on ranked choice voting, which at the end of the day is the fastest, cheapest way to go from 4 candidates to one with 50%. But we got our butt handed to us. We only got 30% of the vote. So a lot of lessons learned from that. But as one of my Republican friends told me, he's like, "Todd, the cause is just. We got to keep working on open primaries."
So what's next in that fight in Idaho? Is it a ballot initiative? Is it something you think you can get as a part of your? You're obviously going to talk about it a lot in the campaign. Your election is next fall, and there's a partisan primary next summer, right, for the Republicans and the Democrats. What do you think the path is forward for open primaries in your state?
Well, I don't think anything's going to happen in the next cycle. I did do a little. I don't think it was underhanded, but I inserted repeal of our closed primaries into a bill that came in front of me in the legislature. Actually, it was the Speaker of the House's bill, and he gave me some kudos for that move. The motion got shot down, but we're gonna keep this thing alive. I think it's going to be 27 beyond when we come back to it.
Yeah, I think we got to keep pushing the issue, right? We've talked about how
Yeah,
New York City is going to be a very high profile media market. We've got the New York City mayor's race here. We had Jim Walden on, who this week testified in support of open primaries. And I think that the momentum is growing there, but so is the understanding that veterans can cross the partisan lines. Let me ask you about a couple issues. I think your campaign ad was very strong. You talked about why you're running, about what's important in Idaho. Can you talk about federal lands? Because that's an issue right now that's central to you, central to Idaho. I don't think is getting enough attention on the coast, but talk about the attacks that are happening on federal lands and your position on that.
yeah. A lot of people back east don't get this, but I mean, public lands are our soul. That's why you live here. 2/3 of Idaho's lands are public, and I mean, we grew up on it. All my best memories of a kid was being out on public lands. We raised our kid, my daughters. We learned to go camping out on public lands, and whether it's snow camping or backcountry skiing or whatever it may be. All of that's on public lands. That's who we are. And Senator Mike Lee from Utah just had this ridiculous bill to try and sell off public lands across the West. And our two senators, they had an opportunity to stop this stuff early. They didn't do it. I think because it was a Democratic initiative, even though Montana's two Republicans got on board with it. And then we let this thing go. And what you saw is everyone in the state coming together, right? Hunters, hikers, tree huggers, doesn't matter, man. We were all out there together to protect our public lands, and that to not 1 acre. I mean, this is a bright red line for any Idaho politician serving in Congress, right? Don't even think about selling public lands. The only conversation we need to have is how we take better care of them.
Ken Burns has been on this show before, and has done some great work on the importance and the American genius and leadership on public lands, right? That where we set aside these public lands for future generations. And I don't think there's a better example of selling our future and kind of selling our country's soul than the idea that we can sell public lands off for a quick buck. It's really short-sighted. I think it's going to be an important issue for you, especially to run on and bring people together on. But let me ask you to talk about the landscape. Talk about who you're running against, right? You got a entrenched Republican, Jim Risch, who's been there since, I think, 2009. There's also a Democrat who's declared, which I think is important for you to be able to differentiate yourself. But talk about your opponents that are in the race so far, and how you think you can beat them without the party machine, without the big money. You're not a billionaire, I don't think. How are you going to be able to compete against the two-party duopoly and the monsters that dominate our political landscape?
Well, the guy we're running against, the incumbent Jim Risch, has been in Idaho politics since I think he won his first election in 1970. So the guy who's been around the state forever. He's the fourth oldest and the seventh richest in the Senate, which is saying something, man. And I think he's lost touch with the challenges in Idaho. And they are, I mean, it's economic, it's affordability. We continue to be a low wage state, but housing, healthcare, all of these other things are actually in the upper half in terms of the cost. And so Idahoans, we can't afford to live in this state. I mean, it's just fundamentally wrong. And that's not a function of, the free market or anything else. It's consistent policy over the last 2 decades that have favored consolidation and undermined competition and gave, the benefit to the billionaires at the expense of the workers. And we just need to wind that shit back, right? It's got to be fixed. And then, in terms of other folks in the race, there is a Democrat in the race. There's another independent. I mean, listen, we're going to hustle. I've cleared the decks for the next 18 months. This is what I'm doing. We're going to get out to every part of the state, every small town, and we're just going to have conversations. And I'm going to present myself, and I'm going to listen to feedback. Idahoans want something new, though, and we hear it again and again, and it's going to be a lot of work. Listen, man, it's hard to run as an independent. Let's just be clear. We got to build our own party infrastructure, but just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do.
See, you are the reason why we built Independent Veterans of America, and we're going to, of course, invite you to apply for endorsement. And I anticipate that you'll get it. We had Brian Bangs on this show a couple of weeks ago. Just this morning, as we went to record, Dan Osborne formally announced
Yeah,
that he's going to be running again for the Senate against Pete
yeah,
Ricketts, who is a billionaire who owns the Chicago Cubs. I mean, this is going to be a hell of a contrast. But can you talk about? I don't know if any of the other candidates in your race are veterans, but can you talk about whether that's the case? Will you be able to differentiate on that because Rish hasn't served in the military, unless I'm mistaken,
yeah.
and how that gives you a unique credibility and a unique level of respect, especially when national security, the deployment of the National Guard, Ukraine, all these issues are so front and
Yeah.
center. And you've been a tank commander, you've been in harm's way, and you've led people, in danger. Talk about that if you can, please.
Yeah, well, let me start with Dan and Brian because both good dudes. I've gotten a chance to meet them over the last couple of weeks since I announced. Uh, you know, different guys, different perspectives. They served in different ways, but I mean, at its root, all three of us have the same value set in terms of what we're trying to do for the country. There is one other vet in the race. He is a Republican, so he's going to be challenging the incumbent in the May 26th primary. I don't know him. He's ran for some stuff in the past, but he's got a pretty good tenure in the army, and I got a ton of respect for that. But yeah, when you come to the national security issues, so I served a couple of years on active duty. I served a couple of years in the National Guard, um, and listen, man, I remember like it was yesterday when my platoon deployed to Kuwait in the mid '90s when Saddam threatened to invade Kuwait again. And I could still see us formed up. I could still see all the families outside the formation. I can still see Sergeant Washington's kids in their football uniforms. This is October of '94.
Mm.
Um, I mean, dude, it's like this morning, right? And I got much luckier than you, Paul. When I got there, nobody shot back at us. So I got really lucky in the mid '90s as opposed to all the hard work that you all did. So there's no equivalency here. But when you've been in charge, as you know as well as anybody, I mean that's a duty, right? And everything you do from a national standpoint in terms of you know what we allow the president to do and what we should be held by Congress, um, you know, you have a completely different perspective on what we're getting into and the impact of that down at the squad level, right?
Yep, yep. I think that's. Can I ask you a question I've asked all the independent candidates? Who will you caucus with? And folks are going to want to know, who you're going to vote for. It's an off-cycle election, so there's not Harris and Trump on the ticket here. But if you get sent to Congress, you're to the Senate, you're going to be in a critical position. If Dan
Yep.
Osborne had been there instead of Deb Fisher, he might have been the vote that stopped Pete Hegseth, right? I mean, one
Yep.
vote difference on a lot of these. But ultimately, you have to make a choice on whether you're going to caucus with somebody, nobody, or something else. So, what's your answer when they ask you who you're going to caucus with?
Yeah, listen, I'm going to caucus with who's ever best for Idaho. So if that means caucusing on my own and being that fulcrum vote, then fine, I'll do that. If that means caucusing with Republicans and poking them from the left, I'll do that, or poking the Democrats from the right. Whatever is best for Idaho is what I'm going to be doing.
All right, right on. I know you're going to come back and join us again. You're going to stick around for a couple extra questions for our Patreon members. Thank you to the vigilant, the very vigilant, the most vigilant, the folks who contribute to make this content possible and help make our Meet the Independent Candidate series possible. I mean, it'd be really fun and powerful and game changing if you and Brian and Dan were all there in the Senate, creating an independent caucus and being that fulcrum. And now I think it's more possible than ever before. You were maybe
Yeah.
the second most popular Idahoan in my house, behind, as I've told you, Ashton Genty, the amazing running back from Boise State, is now going to the Raiders, and my kids love him, and I love him. You think
Yeah.
you can get
That
his
guy's a
endorsement?
I mean, he's pretty busy, but like, he's just amazing, isn't he? Just and a story growing up in Europe. God, the guy's just amazing, and he's been phenomenal. He was phenomenal for Boise State. What an athlete!
Yep, yep. I mean, if you can bottle a little bit of that Boise State branding and energy that really put Idaho on the map nationally in sports with the Smurf turf, I don't know if you can come up with your version of the Smurf turf for the campaign. But let me ask you a final question I ask everybody. Todd, a lot of folks are just getting to know you for the first time, whether they're from Idaho or they're part of this independent movement nationally. I'm gonna give you the floor for 30 seconds or a minute. Why should they support you? Why should they vote for you if they're in Idaho? And if they're not in Idaho, why should they support you and this campaign that you've got up against some pretty high stakes?
Well, listen, when something's not working, you can't be afraid to change course, right? And I think every American voter's got to be willing to change course because the system is fundamentally broken. And I'm a little bit older than you, Paul, but it's never been this bad. And we're putting the nation at risk, and we're putting our kids' futures at risk. So, you got, if you just take the three of us, Dan, Brian, and me, we're all vets. We've all got different career experiences. Listen, mine's corporate America. Brian was an attorney. Dan's a super solid union guy. When I look at economic inequality, I see that corporations undermining competition and basically rigging the economy in their favor at the expense of workers. We have got to change the relationship between big business and Americans, because they've got to, business has a duty to their communities, they've got a duty to their employees, and they got a duty to the country. And right now, the only thing they give a shit about is Wall Street. And we've got to break that cycle because it's undermining it. And that's my perspective. That's what I bring to it. But you get a couple of us in Congress as independents. I think we can do a lot to get this country back on track.
I agree. I'm excited by your candidacy. You and I have been talking for, a couple of years now, I think, and I've been rooting for you to make this move. I really applaud you and your family for taking the plunge. I think you're going to inspire a lot of other folks to run as independents, to run as veteran independents, and to leave the party. I say it all the time, leave the herds, run with the pack, declare your independence. So I can think of no better guest to have on, right after Independence Day than someone who's done it. You've left the party, you've taken the plunge, and I think you're helping break a seal that's like a dam ready to crumble. So thanks for joining us. Wishing you the best. You got my support. IVA is going to be proud to support you in the future. And to everybody listening and watching, Todd Achilles is the man. He's taking on the fight, and he needs your support. Thanks for all you're doing, sir, and good luck out there. Stay vigilant.
All right, Paul. Thanks for all your work.